Turn it up. Woo. Lean back. Woo. Kick your feet. Let it smack. From the coast to the highline pines. We've been talking about the same old lines. Big suits taking up all our time. While the rent climbs and the kids ask why. Kitchen table feels like town hall. Grandma cussing at the late night call. We don't fit in their shopping mall. So we built this show and we said it all. It's that slap.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of Oregon Voices. I'm Derrick McGuire. I'm joined by Katherine Watkins once again, and we have a special guest, John Lenssen, who is a personal friend of mine and a mentor. And John has been working in the spaces of multiracial solidarity for a very long time. And I'm going to let John tell us about his background and just say, welcome, John Lenssen.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both. It's really an honor, to be here with the two of you and to actually be part of this program, Oregon Voices.
Thank you.
Should I tell a little bit about my personal history?
Yeah.
How about if I give you the first question?
Okay.
Tell us as much as you are comfortable with about your background and story and how you've been advancing the idea of multiracial solidarity to this point.
Okay. So I grew up in the north end of Seattle, which was predominantly white at that time in the 1960s. And when I went to high school, my first day in high school, my locker partner was a black student, Ted, who, and I didn't choose him and he didn't choose me. We were just assigned. And he was one of 6 black students that were bused to my almost all-white school as the movement towards integration and civil rights. It was voluntary busing. And so his family, along with other families, just determined, and they were part of the NAACP, they determined they're going to integrate the schools, and they couldn't wait any longer for the city to do it. So they started to do it. And it changed my life.
I bet.
It opened up my eyes. And I saw the way he was treated every day by my friends, and also how girls in particular would not even talk to him, would not even look at him. And the other people said things and used racial slurs, behind his back. And he and I started to become friendly. And he came over to play basketball at my friend's house in the neighborhood. And we were playing a basketball game there. And then my white friend's father, who owned the house there, drove up. And as he got out of his car, he started yelling racial slurs.
Oh, jeez.
And yelling at his son for allowing this and just horrific racial slurs. And this man was the cool dad in the neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
Somebody I really respected. Somebody who went out of his way to give me and my brother rides, and he was fun. My parents were really strict, and he wasn't, and he was the cool dad. And it just rocked my world. It shook my whole world. And so now and Ted's also upset, but I'm upset. So I'm going to walk Ted back to school because I certainly didn't want him walking by himself, through the neighborhood, especially given that. And I'm walking back and I am just shaking. And Ted says to me, he says, "Don't let it get you down. It happens all the time." And that just added another layer.
Yeah.
And that opened my eyes. Mm-hmm. And then I started hanging out more with Ted, and I also worked, after school from a young age, and so I had a job in downtown Seattle, which I told my parents I had the job 3 days a week. It was actually 2 days a week, and the third day I typically went to Ted's house, hung out with him and his family, and became connected with the civil rights movement in Seattle, and it just opened my eyes. And so it's a profound experience for me. And then along the way, many other experiences that really opened my eyes. So I grew up at the time of the civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King and also Malcolm X. And I got really involved in the anti-war movement. And early on, and this was when I was still in high school, connected the anti-Vietnam War movement with the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And I had this profound insight, and I didn't come on it by my own, but I can't remember who first said it, was that the Vietnam War was a racist war.
Mm-hmm.
And that opened my eyes in another way. Racist not just against the Vietnamese people, but racist in terms of who was drafted to fight that war.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just, poor black young men, but it was also poor white young men and young men of all colors, working class people who were drafted into, the army and fighting that war for the wealthy. And I began to see that more clearly. And so I'm really grounded in multiracial solidarity before it became a term. This sense that, black and white young men are being, drafted into this war, and we need to fight back. And the NAACP in Seattle was black and white people. And so my sense, this is normal. This is a multiracial movement. This is my normal. And this was a little bit before, in the very beginning of the Black Power movement. And I remember Stokely Carmichael came to Seattle, and I went to hear him speak at Garfield High School. And I'm one of just a few white people in the whole gym of Garfield High School. And it's one of the early times when he started saying Black Power.
Wow.
And I felt the energy of that, and I did not feel excluded. I did not feel that it was directed at me.
Yeah.
And so kind of my visceral early experiences are that I'm part of this movement. I'm not outside of this movement. And then a lot of things happened, and people that I've met and things that I've done. In college, I was a part of the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, and I joined a part of that was called the Worker Student Alliance. There were two factions, and the other faction was the Weather Underground. And the Weather Underground were bombing buildings, and innocent people were actually killed, sometimes by their bombing. I was not on board with that, but I was on board with the Worker Student Alliance. And so also grounded in my working class connections. Also, we weren't upper middle class. We were lower middle class, working class. And I went to a high school where the wealthy community and the working class community kind of came together. And the wealthy people kind of pissed me off. So I had this healthy distaste for the privileges that they had, and they were the popular people, and they'd go skiing on the weekends and come back with their tans and talk about their vacations. And anyway, so I have this healthy attitude towards all of that. And then I joined a union when I was 17 years old in Seattle. I had got a summer job working as a machinist helper. So I joined the International Association of Machinists. That was the first union that I joined. And then I'll just share these other pieces, and then I'll pause for a moment, because I could talk for hours.
I'm loving this, though.
Appreciate the time.
I just want to just lean in.
And then when I lived in New York City for a summer, I worked in the garment district because I had to make money to go to graduate school. And I joined the International Garment Workers Union, the ILGWU. And then I came back to the Seattle area and taught community college, and I joined the American Federation of Teachers, which was the AFL-CIO affiliated. And then after that, I lost my job there because I organized students to demonstrate, and so they just conveniently chose not to rehire me. That's their term. I didn't get fired. I just didn't get rehired.
Yeah.
So then I started doing some work with early childhood and preschool teaching, which is also a passion of mine. And we started to form a union in this daycare center, and actually joined the Teamsters because they were willing to organize all kinds of different groups. So for about 6 months, I was a member of the Teachers Union, the Teamsters Union. And then when I went to work for the Oregon Department of Education, where I worked for 17 years, working for the state, and doing work like with Beaverton and doing civil rights and equity work. And I was the civil rights specialist for several years there, so deeply grounded in civil rights. But the pattern here is I joined the Oregon Public Employees Union. So I've been a member of 5 different unions. So my multiracial solidarity is also really deeply grounded in working class solidarity. So
Yeah.
little bit about me.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Thank
Well-
you so much.
Can I just say, you are like the epitome of why they don't want us schooling together,
Yeah.
loving together, because you went to hear Stokely Carmichael and you didn't feel excluded because it's not about exclusion. I mean, that's the story that, people are told, but it's like, if you just join us and listen, we always say all are welcome. So it's just hearing your story, I'm like, this is the very person that they are trying not to create in society.
Yep.
And are you still friends with Ted? Do you have any?
No, so Ted and his family moved away. So he wasn't there my senior year in high school.
Gotcha.
But the impact,
Yes,
sure.
huge.
Was-
And he probably has no idea.
no idea.
Yeah.
And also his mom was the first person in the world who hugged me. And so there's something there that's really deep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. I wanted to just share my journey
Please.
with how I met John. So I, at one point in my career, decided that I wanted to be an administrator. And so I jumped into an administrator program at Portland State. And some of the first classes that I took, there was John leading the class on, I don't remember what the name of it was, but it was something about equity in the classroom or something like that.
Could have
You
been
taught
that.
it with show.
Oh, yeah, I think it was that. And then I also taught communication and conflict resolution.
Yeah, I
in
took
that
both
program.
of this. Yeah, right, exactly. So first met you in your PSU status. And then as time went on, I finally discovered that I wasn't really interested in being an administrator, but that I wanted to do more work in the equity spaces. And so as I volunteered to teach Oregon equity modules, whatever you want to call them, from the state, and showed up for a training, there you were, working with Beaverton and with the group that was trying to get people trained to teach those modules. So I've run into you on several occasions, and after we had talked a little bit more during the Beaverton times, I realized that you were a mentor for me because you were doing the work that I wanted to do, which was raising awareness of whiteness, raising awareness of dominant culture, and importantly, how it impacts people that are teaching our kids.
Right.
And so that's kind of where my passion lies at its most fundamental point. As the universe shifts, now I'm integrated into a family that's known you a very long time, and so I'm locked in now, which I'm grateful for. So I really do appreciate everything that you've added to my life. But I do want to ask you kind of what your thoughts are, because you've been through so many different lenses. You've worked at Lewis and Clark as well, or continue to work at
Still
Lewis
do,
and Clark.
yeah.
What is the state of multiracial solidarity in this blue state that we live in?
Do you want to say a few words? Either of you want to say a few words, and then I will share my perspective?
I just from my experience as a multiracial person, so I can kind of like go in and out of a lot of, mixed spaces. For Oregon, there really isn't multiracial solidarity from what I've seen. I'm always looking for that. There just seems to be a lot of pockets, but for us to actually come together and bring the pockets together, just to meet and to confer, see resources, I'm not seeing that a lot. And I think especially when you're looking in the workforce, there's a lot of structure to isolate you or to discourage you from mixing or doing things. And then as you experienced, once you do start gathering and getting people and voicing things, you all of a sudden are in trouble at your work, or you're moved somewhere else, but you're seen as a problem, rather than we're actually doing this because it's going to benefit everybody. If you can stop resisting and just see that this is people-based, we're not looking at intersectionality of like, we're only going to help this one person. We want to help all the people. And so it just seems like a constant battle. So like for me, I don't see it. But again, I'm not all the way out there and everything. But yeah, I mean, I am definitely curious because you've had like a whole lifespan in between different states as well as different institutions. And so I'm curious about like if you've seen evolution of it or de-evolution of it, and where are we right now?
I want to say yes, yes, and yes, because it's so living and so complex. And so knowing Oregon's history is necessary.
Yes.
And the exclusion of Black people, and that's just a sentence to capture a whole history. And if we look at Portland in particular, the history of Black people in Portland and the intense discrimination,
Oh, yes.
and the segregation, and the violence, and so it's part of the history and important to understand. I think you're right. There are a lot of systemic and structural and media pressures to keep groups separate and isolated, and it's really complex the way that works.
Yes.
And I'm of the very strong opinion and belief, and I think I'm right in this. Every now and then you kind of know you're right on something, but racism, I believe, was developed and socially constructed for two primary purposes. One is to extract super profits from Black and brown people, and to do it legally.
Absolutely.
But the other, and they actually wrote about this initially, was to keep white working class people separate from Black and brown people, to give white people a sense you're going to get a little bit more, and your interests are going to be more tied to the white elites and to the white middle class and to the white capitalists. And so to get white working class people to more identify with wealth and progress and all that, as opposed to connecting with their actual deeper connections with their Black and brown, working class brothers and sisters. So with that perspective on racism and multiracial solidarity, too many white people do not see their interests tied to the interests of Black and brown people or Asian and Pacific Islanders. And so there's a lot of work that has to go there. And I'm going to add another nuance, because this is how things have showed up a little different in Portland than in Seattle, which is where my roots were. In Portland, a lot of Black activism is more separate.
Yeah.
And Black affinity work and Black organizations, and way more so than in Seattle. A lot more multiracial connections and historical organizations. And so going back to Stokely Carmichael, because I study history, and it hasn't always been taught to me, I have had to learn it.
Yeah.
So yes, when I heard Stokely Carmichael speak in 1966, I did not feel like he was saying, I don't belong, that I'm part of this. But shortly after that, he became one of the leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And in 1969, there was a vote among the leaders of SNCC on whether or not to include or exclude white people. And Stokely Carmichael was on the side to exclude white people from SNCC. And a very important moment in history. I think they took a vote first, and the vote was to continue to have white people in the organization because they had always been there from the very beginning. But then they waited 4 hours, more conversation, and then they voted again, and I think it was 18-17 to expel the white people from SNCC.
Man.
And so there is a piece of Black nationalism that it's not a primary piece, but when groups, whether it's any form of nationalism in that sense, cuts against multiracial solidarity. And yes, we can have multiracial solidarity with different national interests, but it makes it a little harder.
Yeah.
And so I'm just adding that nuance to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because, you know, I can see a lot of reactionary of like, you know what, y'all done messed with us so much.
That's right.
We don't trust you.
Yeah.
And that when your comfort is at stake, you will sell us out. And so I do get the exclusionary of white people. But, you know, if we're looking at how Malcolm was very much in that exclusionary belief, but then he went and actually did his pilgrimage,
Right.
and he saw all races praying
Absolutely.
together.
Yep.
And then he comes back, and then all of a sudden he's conveniently killed later on. You know, but it's like you see that where it's like if you can open your eyes globally
Yep.
and see that the world actually functions with all of us integrating together, doesn't mean you have to lose who you are,
Yep.
you know, but it's like there's still that.
So that just stirs me up in a very positive way inside, because Malcolm, as many of us believe, was assassinated because he was moving
Yes.
in that direction.
Absolutely.
And I think it's also important. I think this is the 60th anniversary of his assassination today. And so it's important to just recognize that. Malcolm and Dr. King were actually coming closer together in the later years of their lives.
Yeah.
And it's so important to note that. It's also, and this is where I geek out a little bit in history and critical race theory. Derrick Bell was one of the people who started, critical race theory, and he developed this term called interest convergence, and it's what you're talking about.
Yes.
That white people will be on board, but then the interests of white people will sell out the interests of Black people. But it's so important that when he wrote that, he talked about the interests of the white power elite that will sell out,
Yes.
that their interests will dominate. And so he didn't say all white people. He didn't say working class white people, which also happens, by the way.
Right.
But
Sure.
it's not as materially based as the white power elite that will and have and will continue to sell out, the interests of Black people and other working class people.
Yeah.
And it's a very valid theory because, we just saw Trump doing a Black History celebration after he's been ripping plaques down and, regressing all this stuff. And you actually will see Black people talking about how great he is and how he's not racist, even though we have decades of documentation of him actively going after people and
exactly.
children, Black children.
Yeah.
And so there is that once again of like, you've got certain Black people who are going to look at their interests and how are they going to benefit. And that's always been there in like every part of America's attacks on certain races. You'll always have a small percentage of people of that race being attacked who are going to sell out because they get their benefits or they feel like, they're getting their attaboys.
Right.
And then they're all of a sudden the proof that Trump's not racist because he had all these Black people. And it's like, what are we doing?
And it's just so coincidental that the media focuses on them. And I'm using coincidental with great irony.
Yes.
Right. Exactly. So earlier we were discussing Oregon's history, the exclusionary nature of Oregon's history, and in particular to Black folks, but also to pretty much anybody that wasn't white. And so one of the lasting realities of this is that the people left behind are all white. And so those people, and particularly people that look like me, because we know that women were not influential politically until well into the 20th century. So the institutions that we live with today that were created to begin the process of becoming a state and being a state were all created almost entirely by white men that look like me. And so as we go through the current state of Oregon's reality, my concern is that people they just accept this because it is the way things are. And so when you finally kind of see racism in a different way and you can't unsee it, then you see it everywhere. And so any institution that I'm in, whether it be the middle school that I work in, or the state legislature, or the Department of Education, there are all kinds of instances where you can detect racism. And in institutional racism, you don't need a single individual to carry out racist policies because the policies are what they are. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of your thoughts about that state of affairs, number one, and number two, how might we go about reversing that process?
Such an important question. It has me pause just for a moment, because a couple of pieces leading up to, describing what it is and then what we must do to undo that is we haven't been taught the real history. And part of the history of this land involves the conquest and the genocide of white people coming in and taking over and murdering, stealing land, and owning land that was never meant for them or never meant to be owned. And so it's like all of a sudden white people are here, and the white people are the natural settlers. That they are settling, they're actually creating civilization. History starts with the white people. And that's the history I was taught in Washington, very similar in Oregon. And so one of the ways that this, the white supremacy with all the structures and the laws that protect it, and as you said, white males, is one of the ways that is reinforced is not talking about the history, and so then it becomes normalized. And so for white people like you and me, Eric, we kind of grow up thinking, isn't this normal? And so it's unusual then to step outside of that and to say, oh, wait a minute, who's not included, whose voices aren't heard, who has the power. And then we have to start looking at the laws and the structures. And this is where I want to reference my friend who just passed, former Senator Avell Gordley, in the Oregon legislature. She had got laws passed to get rid of all of the racist names of places and locations. And she introduced several pieces of legislation to address that history and kind of the hidden power of whiteness.
Yeah.
And so meaningful. And I give her great credit because this is also part of my story. She was one of the people who took me aside and said to me, because we were in different meetings together, and I once spoke up about racism, and she took me aside afterwards and she said, thank you, I need you to speak up. And then she said, I actually expect you to speak up. It's your responsibility to speak up. And then we started getting together for lunch a couple times every year for several years, because she was somebody who really mentored me and encouraged me, to find my voice. And so what do we do about it? We do need more people in positions of leadership, like Senator Avell Gordley, like Leslie Munoz, friend of this program. We need people in all different forms of leadership. And this is where it gets complicated, because sometimes leadership results in power. And so this is, again, I'm going to talk about, Representative Leslie Munoz and also Teresa Alonso Leon, is they were really grounded in serving their community.
Yes.
So leadership comes from serving your community. And those are the leaders that we need. And we need, more women. We need more people of color. We need people from working class backgrounds. Those are the people we need in decision-making arenas. That said, even the structures of the legislature and the structures of school districts and school boards are still impacted by wealth and whiteness and white supremacy.
Right.
And so how do we address that too? And like Eric, when you said that you planned to be an administrator and then chose against it, the other thing, I'm going to go back to our Beaverton roots. All three of us have Beaverton roots. As I worked closely with Shoshi Gioka, who was the equity director in Beaverton. She started out as a counselor at one of the high schools. We started hanging out together, and we initiated the equity leadership teams. But these were teacher leaders. And so it's not just getting people elected or getting people to be superintendents and principals, but it's supporting teacher leaders and families and community members to have a voice and to be part of decision-making processes. So great credit to Shoshi Gioka, who is still my dear friend, but really working together with her in that multiracial solidarity gave me this sense of this is something we can do.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I think there's just one question that kind of came to mind as you were speaking, and because I agree with you that especially getting, especially women of color, but people of color in general, to start moving into those higher up leadership positions. And as an Oregonian, lifelong Oregonian, I shouldn't say always, as an adult, I've followed the legislature. I followed rules and laws that were being made by our legislature. And in particular, when I was of age to graduate from college and Measure 5 passed. And we're not going to talk a lot about Measure 5 right now, but that had a big impact on me. And so I always figured that the people of the legislature were doing the good work. And so when we get to looking at our state in general, we find that there's been one African-American male, Jim Hill, who has been elected on a statewide ballot in 1993. This is about the time I'm graduating from college. So I was uplifted by that, obviously. And I followed his career during that time and his 2 runs for governor. That's one person in 34 years. And I know that we do have another person of color, woman of color, who was elected in 2021 to the Secretary of State's job, I believe. But I want to focus on Jim Hill right now because of his role as a state legislator, a senator, and as the treasurer, and as a 2-time candidate. And so there definitely seems to be a barrier. At some point, people of color decide that this is just not worth what I have to give up to break down this barrier. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that in terms of the folks of color that we have had as leaders on either districts inside of the state or on a statewide level. And are we going about recruiting the right people the right way?
I have some thoughts, but they're not as rooted in Oregon government as they are in Oregon school districts.
Okay.
And that's more my direct, connection and experience. That there have been, in the last 15 years, there have been a significant few women of color who have become superintendents in Oregon. And they experience such pushback and criticism. And every small thing that they might do that doesn't have absolute support gets highlighted. And they also lead with this sense, not that they experience it, that they live it, but the sense all around them that somehow they're never qualified.
Yeah.
Right.
That they were brought into that position because they were a woman of color, for the look of it. And this is really complicated because many times, and this doesn't play out exactly this way, but many times the school boards really don't want them to lead for equity and racial justice. They want them to just be the face and be the status quo. And so they're not even supported when they, make decisions or implement new policies or programs that will actually benefit, students of color and LGBTQ students and migrant students. And we're in a different time right now with the impact of ICE and how superintendents and school boards do need to step up. But talking about why people don't persist, it's the emotional toll, it's the everyday, it's overwhelming, and how long can you fight this fight? And then often they're actually pushed out too.
Absolutely.
And so that's the part of it that I'm more familiar with.
Yeah.
I'm not as connected with the Oregon legislature now as I was maybe even 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think that was one of the things as a teacher in Beaverton that I felt so hopeful about. It was in 2020.
Yeah.
Electing a board that had finally reflected more of the community that we had. I walked up and down the halls of Beaverton's district office for 3 decades, and almost all of them, it was just a string of white men's pictures in the hallway. And so I was so hopeful that we had people that had come from different lived experiences. And in fact, some of the policies that we experienced as a teacher in a building were like, we don't want our board members going into schools and talking to teachers. I mean, those were the policies that were starting to come out, which was a clear sign of protecting the status quo of power rather than trying to share it with others. Yeah. So I agree with you. That's my experience as well, is a lifelong experience of being in a situation where being so hopeful and then so crestfallen when it all was over.
Yeah, and I remember that distinctly because I was very excited that we were getting a school board that reflected our district. And then I don't know exactly how long it took, but all of us teachers were directed to, we're not allowed to contact the school board members. And we're like, well, how are the school board members going to know what's happening in our classrooms if we can't send them an email and let them know what's going on? And we finally have BIPOC members that we feel would listen to us. And now we're being told, no, you have to deal with admin first, or there's a chain going on. And so that really made the statement of like, okay, fine, you guys got your BIPOC members, but we're not going to let you utilize it. And, going on the transition of power, especially for BIPOC, I used to be very excited and I wanted to get people in those positions. But then after a while, I started noticing their flame started dying. And so I would see like these amazing proactive teachers, and then they would take a TOSA position or they would move into district, and all of a sudden just quieter and quieter and quieter. And the question is always like, what happened? But what happened. It's like if they even try to be who they were, they're going to get fired, moved around. We've seen it continuously. And so, I remember I was talking with my therapist about this at one point, and how, I wanted to move into district, and I had all of these experiences and reasons that I would be really good to go move in to do equity work for the district, and they were just shutting me down all the time. And my therapist said, you don't find change in a system built to destroy you. You've got to create your own, or you've got to go to an organization, but you can't expect to interrupt a system that has all these different ways to destroy you, to discredit you, and to discard you. And that just really woke me up, where I'm like, I'm not playing this anymore of, oh, please, here's my resume, here's all the articles I've written, I'm not begging anybody to let me help them. And so I started moving into doing organizational work and doing stuff like that instead of just interrupting at my job. And I feel bad about that because I was really running it hard for a while, but it wears you out, and it starts taking a toll, and then your body starts closing down. So you've got to listen to your apparatus,
Well, and each of us have different paths. Mm-hmm. And so how do I continue to have a voice?
Yeah.
How do you continue to have a voice and to be healthy?
Yes. All right. So I wanted to talk about the human cost. I've always said for like the last 15 years that racism is expensive. It's going to cost you in some way, monetarily, experience, comfort. You keep on playing with this stuff. But I really want to ask, like, who teaches these rules? How is it that across 50 states, you have such a common practice? And so how do these rules get taught so that it's just, as Eric had said, the air that we breathe, you don't even know the difference. You don't know any better, So if you could just kind of talk to us a little bit about who teaches these rules.
Well, I'll go first and then encourage you two to add on and give context for it. So I appreciate your question, who teaches these rules? So I automatically go to schools.
Yeah.
But even before I go there, I want to mention that so much of our learning about what is normal, natural, and what is culture comes from the media.
Yes.
And so that is so powerful. And who controls the media right now is something worthy of talking about in terms of the network media, but also social media, and the billionaires who pretty much control all of the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so the messages are what is right, what is normal, what is natural. And it just shows up even in TV shows, and what this is and what it could be. And it's all fair and it's natural and it's democratic and
Right.
and all that. So that there's that role. But I'm honing in on teachers and a couple of very clear pieces. So most of the teachers in Oregon are white.
Yes.
80%.
80% now. So 25 years ago it was 90%.
Wow.
But the growth of students of color in Oregon schools has actually increased at a faster rate than the growth of non-white teachers. And so people teach their culture, even if they aren't conscious of it. They're teaching rules and expectations and who speaks and who is expected to do well and who isn't. And so working with schools and school districts for so many years, I'd get invited to speak at the beginning of the year, and schools would look at their data and say, oh my gosh, we have an achievement gap. And then, 3 years later, they would look at, oh my gosh, we have an achievement gap. And it's almost like, this is just an aberration. Why is this happening? As opposed to looking at what our friend and colleague Pedro Noguera said in Oregon 30 years ago. He said, schools are actually designed to produce these outcomes. And so when that's just normalized, we have teachers and really complicit in teaching the values, the history, and who gets called on. And when students raise their hand, who gets called on, whose knowledge is valued, whose culture is valued, the cultural wealth that students bring into the classroom, from their families, from their communities, and migrant families and Black families, and all, their cultural wealth is not honored. Not only is it not honored in the textbooks, but it's also not honored with what kids bring to school. And so they learn whose culture is valued. And they learn these norms, and they learn this belief system that the United States is the greatest nation in the world, and it's a very democratic nation, unlike all these other nations in the world. And, there's no hunger in the U.S., and we're a good and benevolent nation, and people are still learning that, and it's just false.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people grow up with that. And if you're not part of, I'll just put it simply, if you're non-white, you are learning that your value is not as great as white people. And it's so unconscious, but it's pervasive.
Yeah.
So in terms of how this is being reproduced, I think a lot of it shows up in schools in addition to the media.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add to that for me, what woke me up to some of these things is this idea of socialization that, I've shared with you before. This chart that I like to use just makes sense to me by Bobby Harrow, which is a cycle of socialization. And by the time we get to school, we are almost fully socialized into the fundamental beliefs of our families, of our churches, of our preschools. And if you live in a town like I did, like Cottage Grove, that's embedded in whiteness and white supremacy culture. So I think you're exactly right. By the time students arrive, they're in that position. But if you take that a step further, as an adult, if those beliefs are never really challenged because you never step out of that culture, you, like most white teachers in Oregon, most teachers in Oregon go to school in Oregon. And those teachers were taught by white teachers. Like there's a cycle here that's pervasive over decades and decades that just continues to embed those beliefs into what's deemed as normal. And so I think that has a lot to do with who teaches us these things. Well, I think they're being taught without the knowledge of understanding that people that look like me are actually enforcing them.
Right.
And it's interesting, as you were just talking, I started remembering my first year teaching at Aloha High School, in which one of the projects that they would have in the English department was a black soap advertisement project. And they gave me the sheet and they said, okay, this is for like 11th grade or whatever it was. And I read over it and I was like, this doesn't seem wrong to anybody. You want me to teach propaganda skills and rhetorical devices with black soap, and you're going to have these kids create advertisements for it? What do you think's going to happen? And they'd say, oh, we've been doing this for years. They have so much fun. You won't believe the great things they create. And I asked for examples, and it was... I thought I was being punked. I really thought I was being punked. Like literal blackface, horrible caricatures that children drew with like advertisements. And I said, is this required? Can I switch this up? And they're like, well, this is something that we all do and we've done it for years. I'm like, as a mixed black woman, I'm not doing this. I cannot do this. And they still pushed it. And so I had to do it. And so I just told my students, I swear to God, if anybody does this. And then I did my own unit on blackface and all this stuff. And we talked about how wrong the assignment was. And then we discussed how are some other ways we can go about creating advertisement without being racist, but it was just one of those things that I was just like, I can't believe this has not been questioned and that admin would even allow it. And so, and then just also thinking about how like the Texas textbooks were starting to say involuntary migration for slavery. Was that the wording that they were using?
I think that was Florida also.
Oh, yes. Yeah, right. And so just looking at how, the deliberate digs put into the textbooks and to the projects. And, it's Black History Month, and I just saw someone posting their child come home with a tree that had like cotton all over it. And people were like, what? And then other people were like, hello, it's snow on a tree. But then other people were like, but it's Black History Month, and this person chose a cotton-based project. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, are the children knowledgeable of the history of it? Does it really matter when it comes to the conditioning of it, the teaching of it? It's still put out there, that association. There's there's just real sneaky little messages. It's Black History Month, cotton, and the next thing you know, you see senior children, for prom, cotton picking prom date with me, and you're just like, what is going on? Because now it's just a joke. But do they even understand what they're doing? I used to have a lesson saying it was based on bury the N-word. And a lot of that was just giving them the history. And the children are like, why haven't we been told? Why am I a senior and I'm just now learning about this? And then the embarrassment, them cataloging the times that they've said something and why didn't my friend of color correct me? And I was like, well, let's talk about that. are you going to still be friends? Can you survive your friends saying, I don't want you to do that. That was out of pocket. No, I'm not going to give you the N-word pass. So it's just like, it's really interesting how there's subliminal messages that just are so disconnected. It's just chaos. Right. It's just absolute chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of the structure of schools. Mm-hmm. So I was and talking about what you witnessed and refused to participate in with that assignment.
Yeah.
A lot of our families know what their cultures are, mm-hmm. and they have voices, but our schools are structured so that teachers don't actually partner with families.
Yeah.
And so that's the history of it.
Yeah.
Teachers are certified, they're well trained, they know the content, and the role of the family is get your kid to school and help your kid do their homework at best, but to actually partner and talk about what's real in their lives and what's real in the history, or what their journey was to even get to Oregon, or what they face every day, or the joyful things that they're doing in their families and in their culture and their community and their creativity. That's not part of schooling, and it's structural.
Right.
And so unless you really push back on that and start to engage, family members and community members in the teaching and the learning, then it's going to stay supporting this status quo of white supremacy, even with some teachers of color, because it's already baked in.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there is also the issue of you have teachers of color that might not have had a very cultural background, and that they were also forced into assimilation.
Right.
And so there, we have a saying of skin folk ain't always kinfolk,
right.
And so you'll come across people and you're like, yay. And then you just see them doing what other white teachers are doing. And you're like, et tu, Brute? Because it's like, what just happened here? Yeah. But then you start learning about their background and you're like, oh, you've not really had cultural experiences. You were told to abandon your language. You were told right. to straighten your hair, or all these different things.
Let me just add a piece on that, because we were talking about mentoring, mm-hmm. who gets mentored and who gets supported. So Oregon had a system set up to mentor new teachers, mm-hmm. and part of that was to mentor teachers of color.
Yeah, I remember. I was part of it.
But most of the mentors were white. And
yes.
and they also set up mentoring for schools that were struggling. And so they would bring in retired administrators to help mentor new administrators. But these retired administrators had no history of success with right. turning around schools. And so even the question of who gets mentored.
Yeah.
And what are the themes that are being encouraged and supported, and also it's so pervasive, it's so historical, it's so structural. It takes real effort to break those systems and structures down.
Yeah.
I wanted to also just go back to the media, because it is definitely the stage, and so if they weren't catching people at school, they were able to put these messages out. And so just looking at the evolution of TV, and how we used to only see white people on television. And then my mother told me of a story of when the Supremes first came on TV, and my mom was watching, and my white grandmother, had such a fit. Who do they think they are, being on my TV? They're shoving it down my throat. This is Texas, so you can't shove Black people down your throat. It's a population. But it was just such a huge thing where whenever Black people came on the TV, she would turn off the TV. Now, of course, my mother eventually married a Black man, so everything that my grandparents tried to do was not going on to my mom. But it's eventually, my generation comes, we've got Sesame Street, we've got Electric Company,
yeah.
And so there's just so much multicultural programming. And so we had this sweet spot in the late 70s, maybe up to the 90s, I think. And then all of a sudden, we went from I'm Black and I'm Proud, Say It Loud with James Brown to just twerking and booty stuff. And it's like, and you have like really amazing artists of color, but if they're not degrading themselves, they're not going to get a contract to be a movie actor or a musician. And so it's like there's a lot where we eventually do see people of color, but they're in such stereotypical roles. And it just seemed like in the 80s, a lot of our sitcoms, very moral based, and the moral of the story is, you left with a lesson. Right. And you started seeing them kind of bringing in like, I think it was, I can't remember the name, but there was this one Black sitcom where the teenage girl had the N-word written on her locker. And it was huge because we never saw the N-word on TV, and they were addressing it. And, so there's like all these little opportunities where they started bringing in race consciousness and be like, this is your community and this is the things that we all have to deal with. And then now we're just at like weird TikToks where people are just doing rage bait. The social media is just riddled with all of this racial negativity. And so I don't even know where we're at anymore. But can you talk a little bit about the play of media and like, do you feel like we had a sweet spot? Or do you think it's always just been this weird performative?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that when you're talking about, negative or stereotypical images, I go back to where's the power in the media, and what gets aired and what gets paid and who gets supported and all, and it does fall back on money and billionaires, and so those messages are not 100% controlled. But the other side of that is we need to seek out different sources of media.
Yes.
Yeah.
And have organizations, groups, or different media companies so that we are accessing, reality and positive images and multiracial solidarity and what people are doing for joy and resistance, because it's out there. We just have to search for it and share that.
Yeah, that is a great statement. And podcasts like this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Different types of media. I want to thank John so much for spending this time with us. It's been insightful, wonderful connecting with you. And that is the end of this episode of Oregon Voices.